Hi everyone, I'm Sarah Campbell with the New Roots Farm. Excited to be here today and looking at these poll results coming in. I've been raising pigs for, I guess, for real and for business purposes for about 6 years now. And today we're going to go through a couple of things, but I guess I'll just go ahead and get started. I am with New Roots Farm here in West River, Maryland, so Anne Arundel County. Also looks like we have a lot of people who want to raise pigs. This thing keeps giving me, okay. I'm gonna close my poll out.
Everybody should be able to see the poll results now, and I can close them too.
But yeah, so New Roots Farm is a pasture-based, multi-species, diversified farm in West River, Maryland. We do pasture-raised pork, chicken, grass-fed lamb, grass-finished beef. Also sell a little bit of yarn, wool, and pelts from the sheep. As far as livestock breeds go, got White Park crosses, with some Angus, which I'm sort of transitioning out of, and South Pole cross cattle, natural colored long wool sheep, Cheviots, do Freedom Ranger chickens, and what I call a large Berkworth hog. I'm a big believer in crossbreeding and breeding for your operation and your environment and your business. So my pigs are about 50% Berkworth and then 25% Tam and 25% or Tamworth and 25% large black hog. I sell through a meat CSA, so people have monthly subscriptions and they come to the farm and pick up once a month, and they get basically like a bag or a box of assorted meats, and I do that in different sizes. I also do some e-commerce, so folks can order online, do custom, so whole and half hogs. That was how actually I got started. And then on farm, like retail, I've got a small farm store that opened, I guess, late last year, early this year, and I'm starting at the farmers market this winter. As far as, so all of the meat kind of runs through those outlets, and then I sell wool at the Maryland Sheep and Wool Festival to hand spinners or wholesale it, and then also retail the pelts off the farm. Everything is raised on pasture through intensive and rotational grazing. We use humane handling practices at the farm as well. I use the animal welfare approved SSOPs, so their standard operating procedures, sort of as that was my baseline and guideline for developing some of our SOPs here at the farm. So there we go. So a little bit about me. I am from Maryland. I grew up in Maryland around agriculture on a farm. I thought that I didn't want to be a farmer when I grew up and studied international development, and then through that became really interested in sustainable agriculture and labor rights and, you know, like the environment. And so actually kind of came back around to working in sustainable ag through that. And then I have a MS in community development from UC Davis at the School of the College of Ag and Science there. And I studied food systems and focus on SNAP. So I have kind of a strong sociology and policy background. I farmed in California, I farmed in Montana, and I returned to my family farm in 2014 and started farming while working off farm. So I am one of those beginning farmers who has a full-time off-farm job. I hope to one day quit my day job, but it, as you know, it takes a long time to kind of get to that point. So I'm working on it. It definitely, now that I am a couple years in, kind of hitting a stride and getting to a scale where the business is really, really growing and probably need to hire more help and, you know, scale up and make some more changes. And maybe off farm full-time, or having a full-time at the farm and a part-time off-farm job might be somewhere in the next 5-year plan. We'll see, but that is the hope. So I am coming to this presentation from a business perspective and standpoint. I know that there are a lot of folks who like to just raise a couple of pigs for their personal consumption or for their family, or they just want to do like custom and kind of go in with their neighbors. I think a lot of this content will be relevant and helpful for you, but and my advice is going to be for folks who are seeking to get into a business that's scalable. So today we're going to cover finishing and raising hogs, hauling and slaughter, cut sheets and butchering basics, biosecurity, handling, breeding and raising piglets, as well as managing pigs with other species. So it's kind of soup to nuts, but also I think some of these things could be like their own full day workshop. So especially on the like breeding and raising piglets, we're just gonna kind of get into some of the finer, like the high level detail there. And if folks have questions about that, I'm happy to answer. We're going to allow a good generous amount of time for Q&A. So when it comes to fencing, containment of pastured pigs is really important. When you're talking about fencing, you're really talking about psychological or physical barriers. This picture here is a picture of how I keep hogs in. My farm, we've got about 15 acres of permanent perimeter fence with no climb, and then inside of that, move animals around using electric fencing. So with pigs, they're very strong. They can be hard to contain. I love having the like permanent perimeter barrier, but I really rely on the electric, which is more of a psychological barrier. And that's what a lot of the rotational grazing systems and like pasture-based systems use, because it's portable, you can move it, you can train the animals to it and move them around. With electric fencing, there are a couple of different options. Actually, there's a lot. You can use netting. So, those like, you just push they already have the like poles built into the net, and you can like put them in the ground and teach pigs to netting. They make special pig netting. Polywire, that's what I use. There's high tensile wire, so that like steel wire, and tape. I think you're just gonna want to try to probably play with different things if you're getting into this and figure out what works for you. I didn't get into netting just initially because it was quite expensive, and started with the poly wire, and that's how it worked. I've used the high tensile wire as well. I don't use tape. It just doesn't hold up. It's not really recommended in a lot of pasture-based systems because it is like flat and catches the wind, and the wire is made up of some kind of like plastic or with like metal conductive wire woven into it, and all that time in the wind, it basically breaks those, and so it loses its conductivity over time. That's why they don't recommend the like tape that a lot of people use for like horses in a grazing system. So we use reels at the farm and step-in posts. There's lots of different types. There's like fiberglass, plastic, mine are plastic. I get them from Premier. You can make your own. You can buy like cheap, small, like metal posts and then buy plastic insulators. You're kind of going to want to figure out what works for you and what is within your budget. When I started out, I started with large reels and have actually transitioned to smaller reels and like shorter bits of wire on those reels, and just have a lot of little reels, which is I think more cost effective and honestly just easier to manage. So I really changed how we do fencing from the beginning, from when I started raising pigs to now. And like I said, I use small reels. Reels can be large, they can be geared. You're just really going to want to choose what reels based on how much wire you plan to store on them and the design of your rotation. So, some basic principles of electric fencing is, it is a psychological barrier with pigs. You've got to train them to it. With my younger pigs, like you can see in this photo, I use 2 wires, and then the older pigs graduate to 1 wire. It's always about nose height, because that is a very sensitive place, and you want to get a good ground. So with electric fencing, you probably want to learn some basics and principles of electric fencing and how electricity works. And the reason what makes electric fencing carry basically enough like juice to deter an animal from going through it is going to be dependent on your energizer. So what type of energizer you get and its capacity and like how many joules, as well as your ground. So you're going to use grounding rods. I, at the end of this, do list where I buy all my supplies. I really like Premier and Kenco for electric fencing supplies. And then in terms of insulators, I've also done semi-permanent like perimeter fencing with basically a thicker poly wire as an exterior, and I use the lockjaw insulators for that. They're really great. But everything I do is portable. Everything on the farm is like portable, semi-permanent, and can be done with 1 or 2 people or towed with an ATV. So it's just me and then one other person who helps out at the farm here. And I lease the land from a family member. So I'm really lucky in that I have access, but I don't own it. So kind of everything I've done is fairly portable.
And Sarah, just so you know, and folks know, I am putting links to the things that are mentioned in the chat box.
Awesome.
And so if you haven't been able to access the chat box yet, you'll see that little speech bubble at the bottom of your screen. If you just click that, feel free to introduce yourselves too. We would love to have a discussion ongoing while we go through the presentation. Cool, thanks for letting me jump in.
Yeah, no worries. So, all right, what have I got? Yes, so here is actually a picture of my setup for feeders or kind of like my market hogs. I have energizers from Premier. I really like those. I have 2 types. There's like these suitcase ones that you can get. They have been actually discontinued because they couldn't get like manufacturers for the solar panels. But they have new ones and they work really well. You can just like carry them around. They're super portable. You can see I have a grounding rod here. I buy the long ones, get a better ground. We've got clay soils when it gets dry. It's just nice to have more rod. I like the ones that are shaped like a T. They're much easier to pull in and out. This is one of my old reels in this photo. It's one of the big ones that I don't really use very much anymore. But when I started out, we had all like big reels and I had 2 of everything, and I would just like set up a whole square and like then move the pigs to the next one. I would just basically like set up a duplicate of the system they were in and then like move them over. So I still do that a little bit, but now with like smaller reels, and it goes a lot faster. I also used to like have the T-posts and the like, they make these little metal brackets that you can put on the T-post to like hold up the reel, and like I don't bother with that anymore at all. I just make sure it's not sitting on anything that can conduct electricity. So an old like rubber feed trough or like sitting on a brick or a bucket works just fine. I like the rubber feed troughs because the pigs eventually destroy them. So all of the ones that have like holes in them get a second life on the farm. So you can see I'm just running 1 wire here, 2 posts, 2 step-in posts, like brace at the corner, turn them out. So when you tighten that, they don't like come in. And that's pretty much the setup. I advise folks to train pigs to electric fencing early. So when my piglets, they're like the wire is hot from the time that they are like started on pasture. I just run multiple wires. So like there's a nose height one for mama and like a nose height one for the babies. And if you are getting pigs and they have not been trained to electric, I advise, and a lot of folks recommend, setting up some kind of like small permanent area, maybe using like hog panels, or even if like a stall in a barn, and putting the electric fencing on the interior of that to kind of like reinforce that barrier and train them. Pigs are not like other animals. Instead of like backing away from like an electric fence when they get shocked, they go through it. So if a pig does get shocked, they tend to end up on the other side of the wire, which is why that training is really important. Some other advice, I would say invest in quality fencing supplies, and you're going to have to take a lot of things into consideration. when you're thinking about what type of like energizer to buy, for example, think about how many like daylight hours you have. I have a couple of bigger energizers that to have more batteries in them for winter when it's like low light. Also grass, if you have tall grass, that will put pressure and like reduce the voltage that your fencing is running at. So thinking about that too. I tend to just spend a little bit more on energizers and get ones with more joules because I do run with that grass pressure. I want to be able to use them year round. I mean, my pigs are outdoors year round, Farrow to finish, 365. So I just buy the like bigger, more powerful energizers and, you know, repair them, replace batteries as needed. I also recommend buying a fault finder. So this is, mine are all, there's a fault finder and a fence tester in one. And basically if you have a fault in your fence, it can like point an arrow and tell you which way it is rather than you have to like walk around and try to figure out where your fence might be rounding out or where you have a problem. They're kind of expensive. I have a Speed Right and a Stay Fix one, but they both work really well. And at a minimum, you should have an electric fence tester, like a basic one. You can get those pretty cheap. So you know if your fence is on or if your fence is hot without having to touch it yourself. And I would also say when it comes to fencing supplies, buy quality step and posts. They're not cheap. Get ones that are UV treated. I have some that are not, and they basically just like melt and bend over time. I really like the ones from Premier. They're really heavy duty. They last a long time. I have a ton of posts, and the ones that I have some from when I first started like raising pigs in like 2014, and they're fine and they've lasted. So I'm in the South, so it's like super hot and things just melt and break down over time. So I look for stuff like any of the plastic needs to be UV treated, and I have spare parts of everything on hand. Like this energizer here, these little suitcase ones, the like buttons basically eventually melt. So I just have like a bag of buttons for the on-off switch. So there'll be a lot of little things that you learn along the way. Let's see, here we go. So like I said, everything that we do here at the farm can be done with an ATV. I've got a Kubota side-by-side, and that thing is my baby. It gets more use than a tractor or any other piece of equipment. Use it every day to feed and do farm chores, and basically the stuff that lives in that thing all of the time or is in it when we're moving hogs is reels and wire, posts, grounding rods, an energizer, I mean, you'll need that, battery tester, fence tester, some kind of like mallet or hammer for driving in, grounding rods, T-post puller. I have my godfather made a little like attachment for mine with a chain so that I can put it over a piece of rebar or use it to pull out a grounding rod, because I just found they were really hard to get out of the ground, but people also use rebar as grounding rods. So those are nice things to have. A tow rope. I've got a really big heavy duty like tow rope with metal hooks on the end, and that's what I use to move everything around. Just hook it up, drag it. So chicken tractors, the pig houses, pretty much anything heavy gets towed. Electric fencing repair supplies. All of the stuff is generally pretty fixable. Even the energizers, that's one of the reasons why I really like Premier, is you can buy parts and they have employees who can like help you and troubleshoot over the phone. I don't want to like knock on any company or, you know, tell folks you've got to get this, but just get stuff from companies that actually like manufacture, like fencing is their business. The energizers that like they sell like Tractor Supply or your local like home and garden place are just not going to cut it. They're not made to last. They're not quality. They're not necessarily meant for a large operation where you're running like miles of fence and have high grass pressure. They might be kind of fine for a time, but they're not great. I think I've had like one and I gave it away. And then irrigation repair supplies. So all the little parts there. So I want to talk a little bit about housing. There are a lot of options for hog housing on pasture. there's like tons of information on the internet. Lots of farmers do different things, and it can range from what I'd say is probably like kind of a questionable like pallet tarp situation that your pigs might destroy. Pigs will really tear a tarp in half pretty quickly, to like some kind of homemade A-frame, to ready-made steel structures. I use Porta Huts. That's what's in this picture here. They are made out of steel. They're fabricated here in the US, and they have like dealers all over the country. And when I started, I just went out and bought, I don't know, like 4 or 5. I've got a couple of different sizes. I really like them. They provide good shade. They're super durable. They last for years. They're easy to tow, and I didn't have to build anything or spend a lot of time on it. They're pretty plug and play. They are a little expensive, I will say. And then I also, the mature, so basically all the feeder pigs, mature sows and boar, like they live in the Porta Huts year round. And then we have some sheds that we actually built by like my mom's farm mechanic, and he's also a carpenter, built some really nice little sheds that the sheep use out in the fields, but I also use for farrowing because they have a nice solid floor. And I have farrowed in the barn during winter as well. We've got old tobacco barns, so they're kind of like terrible for most things, but in a pinch will work. I would just say when you're thinking about hog housing, I've got some questions up here. I would ask, do you plan to use them for farrowing? So if you do, then their shape should be sort of conducive for that, or have a spot where you can put in a bar so that the piglets can get away from a sow. That's why people like those A-frame ones, because there's basically, with the mama pig lays down, there's still a little room in there for the piglets to get away from her. How are you going to move them? If you build something that's kind of like permanent or super, super heavy, it's going to be hard to move. Those sheds that we have, you can't move them with the ATV. We got to tow them with a truck or a tractor. And that is definitely a disadvantage, and why I pretty much only use them for farrowing. How often are you going to move them? How durable do you need them to be? Are you going to use them year round? Also, do you live in a place with high winds? It's kind of like the same with chicken tractors. Some designs are better than others depending upon where you live. Like in the Midwest, they have a lot of wind. And these are nice because I can pound them into the ground with like rebar, and I do that before storms. I will stake them down, but I have, in really, really bad storms, had them get like kind of like picked up and carried away, and then gotta bring them back. So, but they're pretty durable. But basically, a good house will be durable, portable, and provide good shade. Shade is really important for, all animals, especially in the summer when it's hot. So I'm gonna talk a little bit about finishing and raising. So feeding pigs, our pork is pastured, but pasture is, pigs are monogastric. They're like people, they're not ruminants. So pasture is a forage and a supplement, and it's not a complete and total ration. I think there are a few farmers who don't feed supplemental feed, but I don't, like, that wouldn't work for me. They would take a really long time to grow. So I feed a limited ration. So with hogs, you can be free choice feeding. So have some kind of feeder out there that they can eat from all the time, kind of at will, or you can control the ration and like feed them once or twice a day, or kind of whatever your schedule is in feeders. I feed a limited ration. This works for me. I kind of do pigs in smaller batches. Don't usually have more than 20 feeders at a time. And it makes it easier to move the pigs for me. My weights are all super consistent. It gives me a lot of control over how much they eat, my grain bill, my timing. And anecdotally, I have heard from farmers that basically free choice pigs end up probably eating the same amount as you would when you're giving them a ration, but they're maybe a little bit less motivated to forage. Also, those bulk feeders, I would say it's again kind of a trade-off. Free choice feeding can save on labor costs because you're not out there like bucketing them food daily. But it does require an upfront investment in feeders. And when I first started, there was like no way I could afford one of those hog feeders. Also, we're in a region where there's not a lot of commercial hog farming, and there hasn't been historically, so it's equipment that's harder to find used. Like you can, but like in the Midwest or like down in the South, I've been like driving through North Carolina, like see hog feeders on the side of the road, like out in people's yards, like rusting. Like we just don't have that type of industry here. So when I first started farming, was trying to find lots of like used stuff. They weren't available, so I just started with the limited ration and kind of figured that out and dialed it in, and it worked for me. Basically, kind of rule of thumb there is I feed a pound of grain per pig for every month of age. And then for my breeding stock, they're on a super limited ration, and they basically get a pound for every like 100 pounds of weight that they like have. So that's kind of a rough estimate. That's what a lot of farmers do, but it really depends also on your feed. And as far as sourcing pig feed, you can purchase it at like a local farm store, like a Tractor Supply or some other kind of like feed and seed place. You can get it at a feed mill. That's what I do. You can have it custom mixed for you. Some folks, do their own custom feed.
Sorry, can you just repeat one more time what your feed ration was? I think it was the pounds per body weight.
Yeah, so I feed per pig as they're growing, basically a pound a day per pig per month of weight. So if they're like 3 months old, they're getting 3 pounds of grain. If they're 5 months old, they're getting 5 pounds. And then for my adult pigs, like my breeding stock, they get a pound per every 100 pounds that they weigh. So they get a more limited diet, like, you know, I've got sows that are like 400 or 500 pounds, so they'll get like 4 or 5 pounds a day. And I'll talk a little bit more about feeding breeding stock
Thank you.
in a little bit. So yeah, and also for me, I work with a local mill. They do a GMO free mix. So a lot of farmers mix their own feed. You can, because you can buy the mineral mix that they like blend into that bulk ration. Mine is for Trell. That's one of the big suppliers around here. They sell seed, fertilizer, and different mineral mixes. So it's a Fertrell mineral mix that they blend with corn, roasted soy, and some like other goodies. But it's GMO free, which I like, and they pretty much all source it all locally or from the New York. It's an Amish run mill, and they will do custom blends for me. So that's nice too, and always an option. So I think that bulk grain is definitely a good way to go, especially if you want to be in a business. It's a lot cheaper. So you can, depending on where you are, you can get it delivered. I don't live in an area where I can get it delivered, so I just go and pick it up a couple thousand pounds at a time. I wish I lived in an area I could get it delivered. If I could, I'd probably actually have a small like grain bin and an auger at the farm, but because I can't get it delivered, I'd be like buying totes and augering it in and just like a whole thing. So we are, at least here in like Maryland, being close to DC, there's a lot of infrastructure that we don't have because there's not a ton of livestock farmers. So that kind of creates its own challenge. And then another thing with my free choice feeding, I check on my pigs at least twice a day anyways. Checking on your pigs, on your animals at least twice a day is a good practice. It's one of the animal welfare approved protocols. So I'm out there bucketing them feed. Doesn't really add that much time since I'm already out there checking on them, checking their water, making sure they have fresh, clean water, and like got an eye on them anyway. So it works for me. I don't know if I was doing like batches of pigs that were more than like 30 or, you know, like over 100 pigs a year, maybe I would look into feeders. But the kind of at this scale where I'm at, doing a limited ration really works for me. Also, when my pigs go to the butcher, I shoot for around 280 pounds live weight, 250 to 280. 280 to 300 is pretty acceptable to me. And then anything over 300, you're pretty much wasting money because they're just putting on fat. And that's what a lot of farmers say. And that's what I found with mine. I started out with higher weights and have really figured out that 280 pounds is an ideal weight for me. And I can get my pigs all within a couple of pounds of that on my like limited ration and rotation in like 7-8 months. And most of my pretty much all of my hanging weights are within like 2 to 3 pounds of each other. So we pretty much got it dialed in as a system. So that's what works for me. I would also tell folks in terms of feed, stay away from like show pig feeds. They're really, really high in protein. They're like meant to like muscle up pigs, and they're really expensive. Like it's just like money that you don't need to spend. You know, it's for a different type of pig. My customers are like families, people who are really interested in pasture raised pork. They really like the flavor, the heritage breeds. I work with chefs, people who like make their own prosciutto, like those kinds of folks. Like they don't want a pig that's been fed like a show pig ration. Like they're really looking for that more like fine kind of like heritage hog. Also some things like that people feed their pigs to like put on weight or like bulk them up, like Paline, actually have like ractopamine in them, which is like banned in Europe and not something that I think a lot like your consumers want to eat. I also tell folks to be wary of the free stuff. When you raise pigs, a lot of people are like, oh great, you have a garbage disposal, I can give you crap. And like that's not what you want. My rule of thumb is if I wouldn't eat it, like I have a very similar digestive system to a pig, then I don't feed it to my hogs. So bakeries will give you bags and bags of bread and free donuts, and like you can get lots of rotting produce. I don't think that's going to build the kind of pig that your customers want or that like you necessarily want to be eating. I don't want to eat a pork chop that was like raised on donuts, for example. Also, there's lots of breweries and spent grain is becoming increasingly trendy. It's nice, it's free, it's a lot of work. Right now I'm working with a small brewery, and basically because it's so high in fiber, it can really only be like 20% of a ration, and it spoils quickly and it has bacteria in it. So you just have to be really careful. Basically, if I can't feed it out in 3 days, I'm composting it and I get it fresh, like right out of the brew tank from the brewery. And it's only 20% of the ration. And I do give that to them, like free choice or mix it in the case of the sow's feed. But this is my first year with spent grains. And because it does spoil quickly, especially when it's like hot out and can only be 20% of the ration, like it's not something I would ever advise anybody pay for. It's nice that it's free, but it's also a lot of work. I'm kind of like, well, you can spend like an hour fooling with the spent grain in a week and like going to the brewery and picking it up, or I could spend an hour driving to the mill and buy like over a ton of like non-perishable grain that, you know, can just sit in the bin. So your time is valuable. I would consider that and just really think about how you're going to integrate and like manage the additional supplement or the free things you want to give you. I know farmers who go to the grocery store and get like bruised produce. I had friends who ran a produce stand, and I would get their like pumpkins that didn't sell at the end of the year, like corn that was like a couple of days old when they got like a fresh shipment in, like bruised tomatoes. I'm like, that sounds great. The pigs love it. Those types of things I think are nice to have, but you know, it's also not a supplement for a real, like a total and complete ration. I think also if you're in the business of pig farming, you know, there are folks who like maybe raise like a couple of small pigs or like some like kunis on like kitchen scraps, but that's not very scalable. Oh, someone asked what I think about fermenting feed. I don't really have an opinion on it. I think it sounds like more work and time is one of my most limiting factors. But I know a lot of farmers have success with fermenting feeds or like building a fodder system. There's kind of a lot of options. But for me, the like limited ration with right now I am with my feeders, like mixing in some spent grains does come with a little bit of cost savings. And my friend's retired, so no, I don't get the like free produce. But I have some other veggie farmer friends who will give me like, you know, when they like clear out a bed, I'll go pick up a truckload of stuff. Like, it's nice. I like it. And it's not too much work for me. I think I've been talking about feed for a long time, so I will stop. But
Valuable stuff though. If folks have more questions, stick them in the chat box and we'll see if we can get to them at the end.
yeah. But just one other note on feed, don't feed pigs meat or dead chickens or like offal. Like if you are also running a pasture poultry business, like when you butcher chickens, don't give that stuff to your pigs. It's illegal. So if you are raising pigs for a consumer and an end market, and you want to have a good saleable like USDA inspected product, don't feed your pigs like garbage swill, restaurant scraps, and like dead chickens. There's a lot of folks that do it. Do not advise. Also, because pigs and humans are so similar, if you're like feeding pigs even your like table scraps or like things that you've eaten off of or that other people have eaten off at a restaurant, like you can make them sick. But I will say pigs are, all that's all about feed aside, really happy on pasture. They do eat a lot of grass. They will eat hay. They love clover. They love cover crops. My pigs love vetch. They go like crazy for a vetch. And we, behind the pigs, if there are areas that are sort of torn up, we'll put in cover crops following the hogs. And it's like a brassica mix. And they love it. So also in terms of raising pigs on pasture, you can really use them to manage a field. Pig poop is really nitrogen rich. That's like one of the reasons why they use it as from manure lagoons and like commercial hog farming as a fertilizer. It's kind of like poultry litter. It's super high in nitrogen. So if you move your pigs through quickly, they're a great sort of like trampling and fertility tool. Or if you need to like clear an acre or clear a space, you can leave them there for a long time and they will clear it. Let's see. So in terms of watering, I don't have a ton of irrigation, so we actually pipe water all over the farm and just use kind of like vegetable growers do, have like made irrigation systems, and like you can see pictures here, bought nozzles. You can also buy like field drinkers that go out there that you connect to a hose. They're kind of expensive, but basically, there's a lot of different systems you can set up. If you're in a place that's more stationary, people do build like hog waterers. I had those when I first started. Pigs kind of just like dug a big mess around them, and because we move the animals so frequently here, we actually just use a lot of troughs. And I found, I give the pigs a trough to sit in, and then one that is like clean water, and I put it partially under the electric fence so they can only get their heads in, and that way they don't like step in it and lay in it and make it a muddy mess. And again, I'm out there twice a day with the pigs, so if we need to just tip a trough out, fill it with fresh water, I can. It doesn't take a lot of time, and we can move the irrigation piping all over the farm. Well, somebody asked if they need to be vegetarian by law. Yes. Animals for human consumption, like, yeah, you can't feed them other animal byproducts. All right, I'm going to talk a little bit about rotation now. So also this photo here is from my first winter with pigs, and it's kind of like everything that went wrong. I had not a, let's see what kind of irrigation piping I'm using. These are from Dripworks. I think it's like 1 3/4 inch. I'll have to look at the specs on the piping, but you can see we just like cut it and put in those like kind of spigots and then run hoses. I like the Flexzilla hoses because they're pretty indestructible, but basically we run really long sections of pipe, and every 100 feet or so have one of these like plastic like spigots put in. But yeah, so back to this here. Yeah, so this was my first winter where I tried to actually like raise feeders year round. When I started out raising hogs, I would have everything processed in the fall, so I didn't have to winter over pigs. Managing pigs in winter is a totally different ball game, especially if you live in a place where you get a lot of rain, and we've had a lot of wet winters lately. So I had pigs getting out because they didn't have enough to do, or there wasn't any more forage. I had mud, like it was just a mess. And I was trying to figure out, I was also raising a bunch of different types of pigs. I had Tamworths, which are like notoriously slow growing, and a bunch of other things. So none of my butcher appointments were like scheduled for the right time, and my pigs weren't ready. So, it was just a really, and I like destroyed this pasture. I left the pigs here way too long. We had a terrible wet winter. Like, I made a real mess of that, and it was a big steep learning curve. So uh, pigs are basically a tool. You can use them to improve your soil and your pastures, clear areas that you want to plant, or they can just simply like destroy your fields or wherever you are. This is why a lot of people end up basically with like um, dirt lot pigs, because they'll like clear an area like chickens if you never move them, except they root and they're really strong. So how frequently you rotate pigs is really just going to depend on your system and your goals, and also how much equipment you have to rehab areas. We have tractors. I have access to a skid steer, so I can like fill in holes, which I've done. Replanted areas, rip it. This field here got like so destroyed that a ton of like weeds came in. They just like unearthed a lot of weeds in the seed bank, and honestly it might need a good burn, but we'll till it in and replant and probably do a cover crop and hopefully like level it out again, and recuperate it. Right now I call it like the garbage pasture. It's where it's become kind of like a winter sacrifice area where we like move animals in or use it to wean cows. Knowing what I know now about pigs, I wish I had just taken a tractor or a skid steer and dropped like a round bale in here for them to like dig in and eat and like spread out and get out of the mud and like plant that grass seed. But anyways, so think about how you're going to manage hogs in winter or rainy seasons. I do plan to build a hoop so that I can bring the animals out in if we have really bad wet winters, and also so I can farrow earlier, because it is so cold outside. That is on my to-do list. Some other things about rotation is your rotation should support your parasite management practices. So the reason, one of the big benefits of rotational grazing and intensive grazing is that rotations break up the life cycle of parasites in your livestock because they are moved away from like contaminated and infected areas. So when those eggs hatch and the parasites like start crawling up the grass, they don't get ingested, and the animals don't get infected because they're not there. So, a good at least like 3 weeks is a pretty healthy rotation. I like to leave areas fallow for 30 plus days before I bring animals back to it, but at a minimum 3 weeks. I will also say that socializing your pigs will make rotating them easier. I spend a lot of time with the hogs from when they're piglets on up, and while the like market hogs are nothing like my breeding sows or my boar where they're like really friendly, like they don't fear me, they like respect me, but they know me well enough that they'll kind of like follow me around, and they know because I feed a limited ration, they know I'm like bringing food, and so they're just easier to manage. Pigs they can be wary, and if they like run away from you all the time, they're going to be hard to manage. So, just spending time with them, being out there, like doing your chores, they'll get to know you, and they should be easier to handle. Also with parasites, I will say like get fecal tests. There's a lot of really great science and information out in the world, and a lot of farmers or folks are just like, oh, just give them like whatever, and they'll like insert parasite treatment here, like ivermectin, but really you should know what you're dealing with. You don't want to create resistance to treatment, and you want to be treating for the correct thing. So do fecal tests. I have mine done by a local veterinarian. I pay $20 a test, and I do them pretty regularly. So, and in doing that, I learned that when I was buying feeders from people, they were absolutely loaded with worms. Even though those farmers told me like, oh, we don't have parasites and we worm our pigs. Like they weren't. That's, I think a place where a lot of small farmers, there's probably a lot of room for improvement in our protocols, just because we don't have access to some of the same infrastructure. But you can send fecals off to like a lab, a veterinarian can do a simple test. So knowing what type of parasites you have is really going to help. At my farm, there's basically a type of like roundworm that pigs get from eating earthworms. So there's like nothing I can really do to prevent it. I just have to manage it and monitor it. They're going to eat that. They eat bugs while they're rooting. That's what they do. Also, mange mites. We have a pretty high fox population here, and they carry mange, and they get in the fields, and then the animals get it from them. And it's definitely something you want to treat for and manage. My other kind of soapbox topic here is like use real and scientifically proven effective treatments for parasites. There is a drug for every parasite. You want to use drugs that are approved for swine. You don't want to be doing like off-label stuff, especially for like approved for swine that are going to be into a feed market, and you need to be careful about withdrawal periods. And what that means is before slaughter for any kind of like vaccine or medication, there's usually some type of withdrawal period. Some drugs have none. It's totally fine to like medicate them and then take them to market. But for some, it might be like 2 weeks, 30 days. So if you have a problem or like an outbreak, that could affect the timing of your butcher appointments. And I will also say people think that diatomaceous earth, DE, is a parasite treatment that's effective for internal parasites. It is not. There is like no science behind that. It's, I think at best, like a topical treatment for like lice and chickens. It is not going to help prevent or help you manage an outbreak of internal parasites in like pigs, sheep, anything. That myth seems to like perpetuate and live everywhere, and lots of people say it, and like you'll hear it at like farm conferences and from like holistic livestock management articles, or people share it on Facebook. It's not true. It doesn't work. When I first started with pigs, I tried it, and those pigs were loaded with parasites when I got them. DE did nothing at all, like ran fecal tests. It was a total waste of time. And, we had to like bring out the big guns and like actually treat with, something from the veterinarian. Like if people are telling you just to give your pigs to eat, just like run from them. Don't do it. Yeah. And also lastly, in terms of moving pigs and like rotating them, pigs are food motivated. Highly food motivated creatures. Use this to your advantage in whatever system you choose. So if you've got like feeders out and you're giving them free choice feed, you're just gonna want to like move those feeders probably to get the pigs to go where you want them to go. My pigs, they learn from a really young age to like follow a bucket. It's one of the things that I teach them because it makes them easier to move around when they're older and easier to load into a trailer at slaughter time, because I just hop in the trailer carrying a bucket and they all like pile in. Let's see. So this is actually just a little diagram of my rotation. So I mentioned that I started out doing like big squares and just setting them up next to each other and moving the animals. And now we use smaller reels, kind of shaped into an L. Can you all see my cursor? I think you can.
Yes, it is showing up. It's pretty small, so if there's a way to,
I don't know.
sometimes with the share screen, if you hover at the top of your screen, you can change your icon and it'll let you like do like a pointer.
Let's see here. I don't know.
No worries if it won't.
Okay.
We can see it.
It's fine. So what I do now is it's kind of like an L. So think of each of these arrows here that's like L-shaped is like one wire. So I have a long wire, usually like either along the fence or around the perimeter, that's actually just insulators that are mounted to the post, or one that like divides the whole field in half. And then I use the little reels. So this like main wire here along the back or in the center is electrified, and that's what powers all the other ones. And then I have 2 reels, corner posts, and it's basically set up like L's. So, in the first part of this rotation, this pink one wouldn't be here, neither would the gray and the blue. It would just look like an L and then another L, and this one would be kind of like out in space, and there's nothing there. So what I do is then when it comes time to rotate those pigs, come and put another L along that. And that way I can just like open up the section here, move them over, pick up the first L and move it over. So it makes it a lot easier because you're just kind of like adding a section and they're easier to move that way. And I can move pigs in like 15 minutes. Let's see. All right. So, and it just requires also pretty limited infrastructure. It's easy. And then I just drive in there and like drag the hut with the ATV. Here is an aerial photo of the farm in a drought last year. We had a like really historic and terrible drought. Hopefully folks can still see it here. I'm seeing some notes that maybe folks can't. But you can see where I have fed out like round bales for the cattle. You can see the little Porta Huts, and you can kind of see the outline of like squares and sections where we've moved the animals all around. So, you know, I've got about, like I said, 15 acres of kind of permanent fence around the house and the like old barns, and that is where we're moving the pigs through. All right.
I know one person is having trouble with the screen visibility, but for the others on the line, if you can chime in if you are as well, just so we know if it's a Zoom issue or a one device.
Yeah. Yep. Right now there's a slide up that says hauling and slaughter. Can everyone see that?
It is working great for me, so keep on going and I will chime in if we have any issues.
Okay, notes on hauling and slaughter, because you are going to be finishing your pigs. You have to get them to the butcher. So early on, you want to think about how you're going to do that. When you get piglets, they're really little and they can like fit in a dog crate in the back of your like station wagon or your truck. That's how. These are some Tamworth feeders that I brought home, and it's a picture of them in a dog crate in the back of my truck. Easy peasy. But once they're bigger and they weigh like 250 to 300 pounds, it's a whole different ballgame, especially when you have like 2, 3, 4, 5, 10 of them. So just start thinking about how you're going to transport them. And like if you have access to a vehicle that will reliably and safely tow your chosen rig, I think that having safe, secure, and reliable transport is really a necessary expense for anyone in the livestock business. You're gonna need a trailer unless you have access to one or someone can always like lend you one. It can be hard to find people to haul for you. There's just kind of a lot of logistics. You can see here, I have a small Chevy Silverado and what I call the pig rig, which was a small, it's basically kind of like a glorified sheep trailer. And this can hold about 5 pigs before it becomes like not small and kind of unsafe. But this is how I started. I have since upgraded to a larger trailer and have like a 16-foot aluminum gooseneck trailer. That was my big purchase this year, and I actually put a gooseneck hitch in the back of my truck. So, and it's nice drive, but really just start thinking about how you're going to tow pigs, what type of trailer you need. A lot of people just use like a horse trailer. I just also encourage people to think about if there's any factors in your chosen transport method that's going to cause unnecessary or like undue stress on your animals. I have seen people who are like, oh, I just rented a U-Haul truck and like shove the pigs in there and then like pressure wash it when I was done. Like it's not meant for towing livestock. I don't know if that's legal. I don't recommend it. Or like people building pens on open flatbed trailers out of like hog panels. I think if your animal has like got a long way to go, at least where we are, there's not a lot of butchers. So I drive to Hagerstown for my custom pork and to Delaware for my USDA inspected meats. I think that it will be really, really stressful on those animals to be like in an open pen on like the Beltway or driving over the Bay Bridge. So I really like my like aluminum and steel sort of enclosed areas, and they just like bed down and, you know, hang out for the ride, and it's pretty low stress. Stress is a really big factor that can impact flavor, especially right and like tenderness in your meat right before slaughter. You really don't want your animals to be stressed. So think about how you're going to get them there, and then also how you're going to load them. I set up a loading system. Basically, I use panels. Because I have a sort of smaller rig, it's more maneuverable. Drive it out into the field right where the pigs are and get them into a small pen, get them up in the trailer. Pretty much like half the pigs will pile into the trailer, and then I kind of just push out the ones that I'm not taking to market. So I'll like look at all of the pigs, kind of figure out who I'm going to take, use a livestock marking crayon, mark those pigs, and use the panels to kind of sort them, contain them, and get them up in there. Some people will like build a runway. You can build like a runway with like hog panels and T-posts. Basically, you just want to kind of like keep them moving. Some kind of like setting up some kind of loading system or a chute is going to make it a lot easier. There is no universe in which you will out wrestle a pig and get it into a trailer if it doesn't want to go. Like, they are low to the ground, they are strong. I have had pigs that will not load for the butcher, and I have had to leave without them. Like, it's not going to happen. You want to like make the right choice, the easy choice. I really do recommend reading Temple Grandin's books about animals and handling systems. They're really great. I learned a lot of like tips about kind of the types of things that startle animals or make them not want to go somewhere. And it was really helpful in figuring out how to kind of like load and get the animals to go where I want them to go. Also, you are going to want to withdraw feed for at least like 12 to 24 hours before slaughter, but make sure that they always have access to water. This is just going to make processing at the plant a lot cleaner. Your butcher will like you more. It's just like easier and a best practice for any animal to withdraw feed before processing. I like to load my pigs the night before. We load them into the trailer, give them water in there, have it all like hooked up to the truck and ready to go in the morning if I'm going in the morning, or even load them the night before and take them to the plant the night before. This gives them time to kind of like settle down. It just really depends on where you're going. It depends on the plant, but a lot of them do say you can come the night before and bring your animals and just unload them and put them in the pens, and you kind of like put your information on the pens and they'll call you the next day. I also like going to the plant the night before because they're not busy. There's usually nobody there, and so we can like take our time and unload, and I don't feel like rushed or anything like that. It can be easier. But before you work with any butcher, I do recommend actually just like visiting the plant beforehand so you can look at their unloading area and see kind of like what the loading dock looks like. I work with 2 processors and they have really different loading docks. One is like really open air. It's got a nice ramp. They have a scale in it. It's really easy. The animals like it because it's like open, and the way it like flows, the animals just kind of like unload on their own. They go up. My other processor is like a much like older plant and a kind of not great loading area. And there's like a holding pen outside and then a hallway and all these pens inside. And the animals do not want to go in that hallway. You know, it's like dark, and if there's water on the floor, it's reflecting light. So you just kind of want to, if it's your first time, want to know what you're maybe going to be up against or what you might encounter. It's just helpful to know. But basically, pretty much every plant is going to have some kind of unloading area and then pens that you put your animals in and before they get processed. Once they're at the plant and they go to process, I mean, there's a lot of if you're interested in knowing more about that, there's a lot of great videos, but basically they are stunned and then bled out. You know, that is the definition of like humane slaughtering, is that an animal is unconscious when it dies. So with pigs, they usually stun them with electric. They don't use a captive bolt gun on pigs like they do on cattle and sheep. So but every plant is different, but they'll often just put them in a little like squeeze chute and stun them. And one last note on trailering and hauling, and this is just my own lesson learned, is make sure that your trailer is like well maintained, has been inspected, or somebody who knows a lot about trailers has looked at it recently, and that you're using the appropriate hitch and tongue weight. There's just kind of a lot of little safety things you can do with trailers. We actually got in an accident earlier this year with this like little trailer, and when I took it in to be basically rebuilt, learned that it had been manufactured with axles that are now illegal because they are basically like hot dog cartwheels, and we have been towing livestock with it. So, you know, I wish that I'd had like a reputable person come and like look at that when I got the trailer. But I didn't know. So I've since made a lot of changes and kind of precautions to how we deal with the trailers. And they should be worked on annually. Like take them in, have somebody take a look at it, tighten up the bolts. Like trailers should be serviced just like a tractor or a truck, but probably not as frequently. Let's see. In terms, and then another note is just if you are towing livestock, think about your insurance. A lot of your regular like home auto policies are not actually meant for business or for farm use. So you're going to want to read the fine print. Also read the fine print of your insurance policy. What happens if you get into an accident when you're towing? I've changed my policy. I have an auto policy that supports my farm policy and have extra insurance on the trailers and extra coverage for if something happens and I'm towing anything, even if it's like rented farm equipment. So that is kind of how you can protect yourself there as well. Note, this is just a list of recommended on-hand medical supplies if you are in the business of raising pigs. So like aspirin, iodine, hydrogen peroxide, rubber gloves, slap shot vaccinators. It's basically like a tube and you attach a needle at the end so you can like slap it in their butt or their shoulder and give them a shot, because as soon as you inject a pig with the needle, you're not holding a pig unless you have some kind of chute. They're gonna like run off. I give all of my shots if I need to while they're eating using the slap shot. So just kind of like slap on the butt. They might like jump a little, like they've been stung by a bee or something, but then you can just administer the vaccine. 6cc syringes, the tuberculin syringes for piglets, they're like smaller. They work really well. 18 gauge needles, 20 gauge for piglets. Penicillin, it's cheap, generally effective. You can get it like Tractor Supply. Easy to use, good in case emergency, but just again remember what I said about withdrawal periods, and you know, consider if you want to be like antibiotic free, all that fun stuff, and don't use medication that isn't approved for swine to treat your market hogs. I think a good example of that is Blue Coat. It's a spray that they use for like wounds and infections, kind of anything. Farmers use it like duct tape on livestock. They're like, put Blue Coat on it. But it's actually not approved for use in animals that are intended for human consumption. So that is like one of those things where it's like readily available, easy to get, lots of people do, but is actually not intended for use in animals that, you know, end up on somebody's plate. Also have a thermometer. If you are breeding and raising your own piglets, razor blades or a scalpel for castrating. And I like Ixamol, doesn't have any, that's what I use for like wounds or like if they've got a bad bug bite or scratches or things like that. And it doesn't have a withdrawal period. Some notes on vaccine and medication protocols. I do vaccinate my piglets. I use basically a kind of an all-around like Respifend, so they get 2 doses of that. Like one, I do it when we castrate all of the boar piglets. When with our piglets, we just basically catch them all up, put them in a box, bring them up to the barn, castrate the boars, and give everybody their first shot when they're like 3 days old. When I first started farming, didn't do vaccines, and one year had all of my pigs come down with like a cold, and a couple of them, it basically turned into a really bad respiratory infection, And I just felt like I was like really between a rock and a hard place because I had sick pigs. I had upcoming butcher appointments. I didn't want to give them any antibiotics, and I didn't want to give them anything where the withdrawal period would affect my processing date. And it was just really, really stressful. And respiratory illnesses are really common in pigs. It's like highly transmissible. That's like what they all like tend to like show pigs come home from the fair with like coughs and colds. So I think me personally, I would rather give a vaccine that prevents, again, like a whole like gamut of respiratory illnesses when they're teeny tiny and like, 2 weeks old and like 1 week old at my farm than be having to treat for them and like giving other medications later. I recommend castrating when they're young. Some folks wait longer. I find if the pigs are like 3 days old, it's a lot easier. They heal really quickly. It's not stressful. They're easier to hold and to manage. Like the bigger they get, the harder they are, and kind of the more difficult it is for everyone. And for any of the like humane animal certifications, I think they recommend 5 days or less, 5-7 days. It's pretty young. And if you need to keep track of piglets, or if you are raising purebreds and want to register them, you can notch their ears. The thing about piglets is they are kind of like fragile. I think that's why the pigs have so many. They are easily like smushed, chilled, bruised. They are really delicate when they're very young and tiny. I basically say once a pig has made it to a couple of weeks old, you probably have to really like actively try to kill it or be super negligent. But the piglets, they are fragile. They can be stepped on. I definitely have had, pigs that maybe looked like they had bruised or got stepped on, but were able to recover where I like separated them from the mom. I call it a pig in a box. They kind of end up in a box in my kitchen with like a heating pad. And I try to recuperate them as much as I can. Usually have like pretty good success with that. Sometimes they just need to be like separated so they don't have to like fight, or they can take a little time to recover so they're not underfoot. And then mature hogs, there's not a lot that they need. Like I said, routine fecals. This is actually gonna be my first year using Farrow, which is a vaccine for sows that I'm having some problems with litter sizes. I think there's maybe some bacteria in my soil that might be affecting that, but I don't know. Pigs can get all kinds of things. One of them is like parvo, like your dogs get. So there are vaccines you can give to sows before breeding that kind of help with their general like health and improve pregnancies and farrowing outcomes. But other than that, there's not a whole lot. Who set humane animal standards? When I'm talking about some of those animal welfare protocols, I'm talking about any of those third-party ones like AWA, Animal Welfare Approved. There's, I don't know, what is the one that Whole Foods has? They have their like 5-step, and there's like numbers, all of those. There's a whole bunch of them, but I kind of read through those and used them as some guidelines when I was developing the SOPs when I first started farming with pigs. A few more notes on medical care, emergencies, and liability. I will tell folks, mean or aggressive pigs have no place on your farm. Like, they are just a risk and a liability that you do not want or you do not need. There's also no reason to have mean pigs. Pigs are like incredibly like friendly, social creatures. Like, you don't need a mean one. Get rid of it. They will hurt someone. They will pick fights with your other pigs. Like, they will just create problems for you as people and for your other animals. I had a boar that would get out and attack other boars, younger boars, replacement boars who I needed. And, I called them. You need to be also kind of okay with culling livestock. And that can mean going to freezer camp. They can serve a higher purpose, but people breed for a lot of things. I breed for flavor, like good foraging ability, like good mothering in my sows, but I also breed for personality and attitude. I had one really mean sow who, when she had piglets, she was actually perfectly fine and social as like a regular pig, and then when she had piglets was like crazy and mean and knocked people over and attacked them, and like as soon as those piglets were weaned, she was out of there. Like, it is just a hazard that you do not need at all. Pigs are very strong. They are low riders. I'd say don't give them any opportunities to knock you over. I tell folks, like, keep your knees together in the field. If they run between your legs, like, you're gonna get knocked down. Don't give them any opportunity to do that. They sell pig boards that you can use to handle with pigs. It's just a big plastic board with some handles in it, and those can be really good for moving them. Also, some other notes on safety. Livestock are really sensitive to hormones, and they can be more excitable, aggressive, or friendly, or experience a personality change. Like if they're cycling, if a female's in heat, or if the boar is around and the females are in heat, or if you are a woman and like you're ovulating or menstruating like the animals, no. So you really just need to watch out for that. I have been jumped on by a cow in heat, and so like it's not fun. It can be really painful. So just kind of be mindful of that and really aware of your surroundings at all times, and keep an eye on those male farm animals. I've been lucky. All of my boars have been really social and friendly. They're all ones that I've raised from piglets. I've never bought a mature boar from anyone, and that's kind of like one of the reasons. And, you know, they should respect you, but, you know, need to be socialized. And then in terms of liability and safety, you know, have a biosecurity plan on your farm, have protocols in place. Insurance, I talked a little bit about that with hauling, but you should also have a general liability policy on your farm that covers your stock, your inventory, so like meat in the freezer, and any damage caused by your livestock. My insurance policy, I have my animals insured for their full retail value, like out in the field. So like pig gets struck by lightning, gets stolen, like I don't know, something bad happens, I actually have them insured at a retail value, and it's really cheap. Like a general liability policy for a small farm is not expensive. If the cows get out and cause a car accident, I'm covered. And if I have a power outage or hurricane or something, or the barn burns down, like, you know, and I have like $15,000 worth of meat in the freezer, that's also covered. So, and, you know, make sure your auto insurance policy covers you and your trailer while you're transporting livestock. And I always advise people to use the legal tools that are available to minimize your risk. So have the appropriate type of entity, whether it's some kind of corporation or an LLC. Just, you know, consult the experts and figure out what you need depending on the size and scale of your business. Biosecurity. This is really important, especially with pigs, because of zoonotic diseases. And what that means is they are diseases that can be transmissible between humans and animals. Pigs, they are so similar to people. We can catch illnesses from each other and give each other illnesses. So you need to protect your pigs both from people and other livestock. So like swine, maybe other pig farmers, or, you know, other livestock diseases or illnesses that might be transmissible to them that come from other farms. So, you know, generally don't let anyone take care of your hogs or be around them who has some kind of respiratory infection. I think that when I had that really bad scare, it was and a bunch of my pigs came down with a cold. It was because I had a cold and I was farmed by myself, and, you know, probably maybe passed it on to them. You can keep a closed farm, which means that livestock don't kind of come in and out. So you breed your own, you're not like bringing in new animals all the time, like that type of thing. So, you know, that is a risk with like feeder pigs. If you're buying feeders and not breeding your own, you just want to be really mindful about where you're getting them from, and make sure that you're doing things like quarantining them for like 2 weeks before you mix them in with yours. And do that with any new stock, like quarantine them, keep them separate, keep them in a different place, do fecal tests before you integrate them with your own stock and bring them into your fields. There's a lot of like really simple preventative things you can do to mitigate biosecurity threats, like foot baths. So leach water, have people like put their shoes in it. I have plastic booties at the farm, so anybody wants to come in the fields has to put those on. Like I have people do foot baths and I give them plastic booties. I ask people when they come to the farm to not wear clothes if they've worn to another farm, if their vehicle has been on another farm, to clean it or like sanitize the tires. When we go to the processing plant, I bring a different pair of like rubber boots, and I put those on before I unload, because you're going to be in there, you know, in the pens and like walking back and forth where other people have unloaded. And I also sanitize the truck and the trailer tires when we get home. So I pressure wash the whole trailer, clean the tires, change my shoes, sanitize the shoes that I wore in there, you know, just simple preventative things that you can do to keep the bacteria from coming from other people's farms to yours. Veterinarians can be a really good source of information on biosecurity. They are always worried about these types of threats and will be able to give you really good recommendations for how to protect your farm and your animals. So in terms of raising pigs, I recommend that people start with feeder pigs. You know, buy some feeders before you decide to start breeding and raising hogs. This is a really good way to get started. This is how a lot of people get started. So do some research, think about what type of breed you want, and buy piglets from a reputable farmer or like a breeder if you want to do the kind of like heritage purebred route, and get piglets from an operation similar to how you plan to manage your pigs. You know, get them from a pasture-based system. That's what you want. If you want to do woodland raised pork, get them from somebody who raises pigs in the woods. Choose a breed based on your goals, the types of customers that you have, your market channel. For example, like don't pick pink pigs if you have no shade, because they will get sunburned. Or, you know, don't pick a lard pig if your customers aren't going to want fatty meat. And also, like, don't choose a lean pig if you want to make prosciutto. You know, do some of that research. Also, while they are cheap and readily available, commercial hogs that you can get from like kind of your local hog farmer or from an auction sale barn, they're not bred for pasture-based systems, and neither are show pigs. Show pigs are also really expensive. So, you know, those piglets, people pay like $400, $600, $700 for them. You like do not need to be in that kind of business, but also I would avoid your $35 sale barn piglet as well. You know, you're probably going to be looking for a good heritage piglet, depending on where you are, probably spending $100 to $125. I think it's also become an increasingly competitive market due to the pandemic. But again, just like stay away from pigs that aren't really bred for pasture or for meat production. A lot of farmers during the pandemic, a lot of hog farmers like liquidated hogs that they had, and a lot of people bought them because they were super cheap or trying to help those farmers out, and brought them to pasture, and like those pigs were like sunburnt, pneumonia, like because they're just not bred to live outside. So they're bred to, you know, reach a finishing market weight indoors in a climate controlled environment in like 6 months, and that's not what you're going to be doing. But generally look for healthy pigs. So a pig that's like sick or unhealthy will be kind of like dull, dry skin. It might be flaky. Its hair might be falling out. It might be patchy, probably thin. If it's not at all like muscled or its ribs are showing, it's probably got parasites or worms. Like you can kind of look, they look kind of like sad and gross. You will probably see some that look really not very yummy if when you go to a plant and drop them off and see other farms' pigs. You know, you'll kind of get a good sense of the whole like range and gamut. But, you know, a healthy pig should have a good weight, be like well muscled, and have some fat. Even like the piglets get like chunky little jowls. Like you want them to be like bright eyed, alert, not patchy, not itchy looking, or like rub it. Like if they're really itchy, they might have like lice or mites, just stuff to watch out for. If you're buying piglets from somebody, verify that they have been castrated if that's what you want. I definitely have talked to a lot of folks who got started who thought they were buying castrated pigs, but they weren't, or the farmer said they would be and they showed up and they hadn't been done. And by that point, they're like 8 weeks old and like really hard to hold down. So just make sure that you're communicating really clearly about your expectations. Ask them about their vaccine protocols and records, and do fecals when you get those piglets and you bring them home. quarantine them, try to socialize them, train them to electric fencing before you turn them loose. Because once they're out of there, they're out of there. You know, maybe keep them in a stall in the barn or build a small pen for them, kind of whatever you need to do so they can get to know you a little bit before you like move them out into your system. And also you want to make sure that they don't have any parasites, and if they do, treat for that. Cut sheets and butchering. So every processor that you work with has their own cut sheet. They're all different. There's no universal cut sheet. So just ask for it in advance. So if you have questions about it, you can clarify those. If you're in the custom business, so if you're not buying or if you're not taking pigs for like retail slaughter and filling out your own cut sheet, you're raising pigs and just like kind of charging by hanging weight like a lot of folks do, and then the customer gets back kind of what they want. They might pay the processor or they pay you because you've included that in your cost. Like, don't expect them to know how to fill it out. They're all different. Your processor is going to have their own language, and you're just going to have to learn to speak the same language as your butcher. I have a really great relationship with my butcher, but it took years, and the first two were really hard. Here in the Mid-Atlantic, there's also a lot of like colloquial terms, or a lot of our butchers are Amish and Mennonite, so they have different names for different cuts, or like they call pork tenderloin, like the true tenderloin, like pork fish, or like hog maw is a stomach. And so you're just gonna have to learn these words and be able to translate them to your customers. My customers never see the cut sheet. I fill it out for them and have kind of developed my own language for it. And basically, when I'm taking orders, I basically work from like either the back of the pig to the front or the front of the pig to the back, and like, you know, how do they want that done? What sausage flavors? I think Caroline emailed around. I created my own little like info sheet to help manage people's expectations about what kind of cuts they would get, what their options are, and shared that with everyone. Managing people's expectations is really important. Also,
yeah, I didn't get a chance to email it, but I am bringing it. I'm going to post the link in the chat box, and then I can send it after the presentation is over.
Cool. Also, find a butcher before you get started. Don't wait until you have like market ready pigs, especially now with the pandemic. People are booked up like a year in advance, 6 months. So figure out, you know, what you need. Do you need USDA inspected? Is custom okay? And call around and see when they're booking and like plan accordingly. So, you know, see if they're taking new customers. I have one processor, I have been on their wait list for USDA inspected since I started raising pigs, like 5-6 years ago. Like, and I have not moved off that wait list. Like, they are just so booked, and they have like kind of limited bandwidth for USDA. So they do my custom and they're really great, but you know, and that is a difference. You know, if you need custom or USDA, I just think about kind of how you want to sell your product. Because I do individual cuts, I need that USDA stamp. Custom, I do some of that, but I basically have a contract to like pre-sell the animals and, you know, work with a different processor that is a little bit cheaper. And they provide some different services that my custom customers prefer. When it comes to transporting meat, I just use boating coolers. You get them like Sam's Club, like $60, $100. Big cooler that's meant to like hold stuff frozen for days is a really great way to transport your meat. In terms of storage, I use chest freezers and digital temperature loggers. Some people might, depending on kind of your size and scale, maybe you'll build a walk-in freezer, but chest freezers are a really great way to start. They're pretty economical. When they're not in use, you can unplug them and they don't cost you any money. But I also have heard that during the pandemic, they are hard to get right now. So just another heads up or thing to know. And then in terms of permitting and licenses, you might need, depending on what state you're in, a permit or a license to store meat on your farm. Like, my freezers are inspected annually, and I have a permit by the health department. And if you're selling at a farmer's market, you might need a different one. So I think folks might be from all over, but just check with your state Department of Ag and your Department of Health to see what you need to sell and store meat on your farm. And I'm going to just talk really briefly about breeding and raising pigs, but really what I advise for folks getting into it is to buy feeder pigs, raise them, and figure out what you like before you start a breeding program. You can try different pigs. Maybe you love Berkshire hogs, maybe you love Tamworth. Like, you can figure out what your customers like. I started out with large black hogs, which are, people love them. They're a great heritage breed, but they're super fatty, and they didn't like kind of yield the type of like meat product that sold really well, or their bacon was super fatty, and bacon is one of my big like money makers. People love my bacon, so I changed my breed. So you can also, if you start out with feeders, you can try different things. I raised Herefords, I raised large black hogs, I raised purebred Tamworth, I raised like blue butts, from some like old school like 60s, 70s farm genetics. I tried a lot of different things and, learned a little bit about each of them. I love the flavor profile of Tamworths. I think they have really great bacon. I like that they're red. I like that their ears are up because they can see. I love that my large blacks are super gentle and mellow, and they're really great foragers, and they're good mothers. But like, they were so fatty, and the Tamworths were super slow growing. Berkshires are faster growing. So I ended up doing some crossbreeding. I AI'd. I got a farmer who was supplying me with piglets to AI and crossbreed for me so I could get more pigs from him before I started like breeding my own. So figure out what you like. It's an opportunity to experiment before being like wholly committed to a breed. And when you do get into breeding, your breeding program should support your business and your farm goals. Like, I needed to be able to finish pigs in 8 months or less. And so my breeding program supports that. I need my pigs to be able to farrow year round. I need larger litters. Like, I need pigs that aren't pink because they get sunburnt so badly out in fields. These are all things, that are part of my breeding program. Just some general notes on breeding and raising piglets. I don't think it's super hard. Sows cycle every 21 days or so. You're going to want to track that. You're going to keep track of breeding dates. I tell folks, if you can track a period, you can track a pig in heat. Like, it's really not rocket science. It's not that hard. You just have to spend enough time with your animals to know them and to know when their behavior is different or to know when they look different. In terms of breeding, you can keep a boar. You can artificially inseminate. A lot of the like semen that's widely available is show pig semen. So I recommend, again, actually talk to somebody, get it on the phone. I worked with some, suppliers out in the Midwest and talked to them about my goals in my breeding program. And I was like, I don't raise show pigs. Like, I raise pigs on pasture. And they were like, oh, so you want like old school pigs. You're like a heritage hog person. Okay, yep, here's what we would recommend, and they have that in stock. But, and AIing pigs is really easy. I watched a YouTube video and sort of figured it out myself. There's tons of good videos on YouTube in terms of pig production. But I also found that if I had at least 2 sows, then actually keeping a boar was cheaper. I didn't want to keep a boar because it seemed like a whole other management thing. But when I sat down and did the math and like penciled it out, I was like, the boar cost me $1 a day. Like, getting semen is expensive because you have to overnight ship it. You have to buy the supplies, and if it doesn't take, then you have to do it again. So like, you can end up spending like hundreds of dollars just on one pig to get her bred. And I was like, it's cheaper to have a boar. So that's what worked for me. But if you don't want to manage a boar, or, I have also AI'd when I want to bring in new genetics. So, there's pros and cons to everything. In terms of farrowing, you can do it on pasture, in barns. I do it in our special little sheds out in the barn. You're just going to want to find a way to keep piglets safe. And I always say, like, good sows are worth their weight in gold. Somebody who is a good mother, who like nurses all of her piglets, who tries not to step on them and like crush them, who like is attentive and is also not mean or aggressive with you. So you can get in there and like mess with the piglets or help her if she has a problem. Like, they're totally worth it. Like, breed for that and cull anyone who doesn't meet your standards. A couple more notes on that. You want to maintain healthy sows. Like, this is why my breeders get a really different feed ration. Fat pigs have problems. They're more likely to have piglets get stuck while they're in labor, to have problems getting pregnant, to have problems farrowing. Like there's just an overweight sow is, you're not going to have good outcomes. So make sure that your pigs have ample bedding. So one of the things I look for in a good sow is her like nest building ability. All my sows build really nice nests. It's one of the things I breed for. I usually just like drop a bale of hay or straw out there, and then like she builds it, or she'll make it out of grass. But you know, you just want them to have a lot of bedding so they don't get crushed. Temperature, they might need heat lamps depending on where you are and the time of year. I've fared in the barn a couple of times when like it was just super cold and the ground was like really cold, and I didn't think that the bedding was going to cut it. Also, if they're like constantly trying to get up against their mom to stay warm, you increase your likelihood of mortality and like piglets getting crushed. So you know, you put a heat lamp in the corner, like with a bar that the mom can't get under, and like the piglets have sort of a corner and a warm retreat, and they can like pile together. That can help. So you know, you might want a heat lamp. I like the Premier ones. They're less fire hazardy. And you know, sometimes you will get a weak piglet or a runt. You can really like try with those, but you know, sometimes you might have to, you know, your pig might get stepped on or be like sick or weak, and you need to be prepared to have to like dispatch that pig, and like, you know, humanely. I'm lucky I have access to a veterinarian. My mom is one, so she's euthanized piglets for me, so I didn't have to. But it's something that, you know, just to consider. Again, I talked about castrating. Do it early if you don't want to raise lots of boars. And weaning is pretty easy, for at least for me. I basically, once the piglets are eating grain, sometimes the moms will wean them themselves, usually between 6 and 8 weeks. You can tell she's kind of like sick of them, doesn't want to be around them anymore. I'll like get the piglets distracted with food and basically like walk mom out of there, and she goes in a different pen, and I leave the piglets where they were. And then they're already trained on electric, and just work on like rotating them. Kind of coming to a close here. In terms of managing pigs with other species, like I have a diversified farm. So we've got cattle and sheep and chickens all in the same field. So kind of some food for thought here is like manage your field so what the pigs are doing is complementary. I like to put the pigs in fields that I think need the fertility. Multi-species raising is definitely an exercise in planning, like who's going to be where and when, who will respect what fences. The cows will just like walk over that wire or like take it down. So I try not to have them in the same field, or if I do, then I'm like running another set of wires. The sheep will, you know, the sheep will also plow through it, but I use netting for my sheep. So I can kind of just like move everybody around each other, but just think about, you know, who's going to be moving where and when. Managing pigs on pasture is really an exercise in observation. I think animal units is kind of like a nice theoretical tool, but with pigs, how long they stay in a section really depends on how much forage is in there, what type of forage, how many pigs, how old are they. I move my pigs when they're younger, maybe every like 7 to 14 days. They might stay in that section 2 weeks. Once they're bigger and closer to market weight, like they're moving every week, because it's just like, it's a lot of weight. They're going to do more damage, and they need to be rotated more quickly. But it kind of depends on the section and how big I made it. And like, had I mowed recently, or had the cows been through there recently? How dense is that forage? Is there a lot of weeds? Like, is there a lot of clover? And just kind of adjust. And you just got to do a lot of observation. But really everything is kind of an exercise of timing and management. Here's an example. Do you want spring, if you have other species, do you want spring lambing and spring farrowing? If you are keeping cattle and you have a really wet winter, like, do you have enough space to have a sacrifice area for those cows as well as a place to keep the pigs if you don't have like a hoop or a winter system? So just, those are all things to plan for and think about. I recommend kind of looking at your whole calendar and thinking about what your needs might be, and just make sure that you're allowing for sufficient recovery and like rest of those pastures and those paddocks in between stock. You want the ground to be able to recover. This picture here is the field where I raised feeder piglets last year. They haven't been through there this year, but the sheep and the cattle have been through it. And you can see kind of in the distance where the pigs are on the other side. There's a section that I've mowed because I wanted to mow. Like, you know, it's all a real exercise in management. When I started raising pigs, people told me, like, you can't have pigs on pasture. Like, they'll destroy it, they'll ruin it. And you can manage pigs on pasture, like, really effectively. It just does take intensive management. It's not like turning them loose and hoping for the best. They're kind of like any other animal in a rotation. You're just gonna have to figure out, like, what works and, like, what builds your soil and what, like, improves your ground, and work within that framework. Let's see, I see. A question about how much it cost me to raise one pig. I will show you a spreadsheet that I made in a minute. Also, if you want to raise a pig just for home, can you raise just one? Will it be lonely? Yes, it will be sad. Pigs are social creatures. They need friends. They're very, very social. They have their own social hierarchies. There's usually like a dominant female in every group. You don't want to raise one by itself. So here's kind of my run through, my hardest lessons learned, all of the mistakes that I've made along the way. Parasite management. Like I said, DE is not a parasite treatment. Run from anyone who tells you it is. I don't care what you read in Mother Earth News. It's not effective. And also, like, bring out the big guns and call a veterinarian when you need help. These people have doctorate degrees in animal medicine. They know what they're doing. Locate a veterinarian before you have an emergency. I don't think they appreciate the 11 p.m. calls from farmers they've never met or heard of. They're usually willing to help anyways, but there's a real dearth of large animal veterinarians. And in our area, we have tons of equine vets, so they do large animals, but they want nothing to do with pigs. So sometimes you really are kind of just like winging it and sort of flying by the seat of your pants. But you know, I do have a vet that I can call if I have a real problem. She's really far away and she won't come to my farm, but like she'll do a phone consult. Loading animals for slaughter. Give yourself time to figure this one out. Like I said, it can be really hard. I think it's a really great test of a relationship and maybe even your will to live or farm. I compare it to, they say, like couples putting together IKEA furniture is like the ultimate test of relationship. I think loading animals for slaughter is too. It's a lot like that. Mean pigs go to freezer camp. Like, call anything that is mean or aggressive or a problem or that just doesn't fit your breeding program standards. They're still delicious. Get rid of them. Timing is everything. Different breeds have different finishing times. Book your slaughter appointments early. Like, timing. Fencing, training pigs takes lots of time. If there's a weakness or a flaw in your fencing, your pigs will find it. I've definitely chased piglets in the middle of the night because they fit through like a teeny tiny hole. Have spares of everything and extra supplies. I have 2, 3, 4 of everything because sometimes you lose it, sometimes you break it. You don't want to be without batteries because when the Energizer goes out, the pigs are going to get free. Have a plan for mortality. Old crusty farmers like to say, if you have livestock, you have dead stock, but like, it's true. At some point, you're probably going to have to dispatch an animal. Maybe, and that might be the most humane thing to do. You might have a situation where you need to, or you might have a situation where you have a problem. And like, piglets are easy to dispose of. They are small. A market-sized hog or a 200 or 300 pound pig or a 500 pound boar, like, you're not just gonna easily dispose of that. You're gonna probably want access to somebody with a skid steer or a tractor with a bucket, or be paying to have it disposed of, like folks do. So, you know, kind of have a plan for that. UV treated, step in, post only. You don't want things that melt. If you're doing custom, take deposits, have contracts, manage people's expectations. My deposit is $250 because that is how much it costs me to have a hog processed at the USDA inspected facility. If a custom customer bails and walks, then that pig can go and be retailed out and I haven't lost any money. I've got contracts. They're non-refundable. Everybody signs one. I take deposits on piglets basically as soon as I feel like they're viable, and then I have butcher appointments for them. And I book my butcher appointments 8 to 12 months in advance. I think it's really helpful to have a website and a social media presence. When I first started, I basically only had like a Facebook page for the farm, and that was it. And then Instagram is really great, but having a website's really helpful. And then you can also do things like e-commerce and kind of create like a mailbox for general inquiries and questions, and you come up in the Google searches. I really recommend having a website. It can be something simple like a landing page you build yourself, but just go ahead and do it. It's a good winter project. And last but not least, have fun. Pigs are really fun to raise. They are so much fun. They're adorable. They're delicious. Pasture pork, will totally change people's opinions about pork. I have plenty of customers who like, I don't like pork. I don't eat pork chops. And then, they try this and it's just so different. It's so different from a grocery store product. It's really great. People love it. I have customers whose like kids won't eat any other bacon because these like 8-year-olds can distinguish the difference between grocery store bacon and like farm raised bacon. Like, you're delivering a really great product. So have fun with it. And that is all. I know folks have questions. I have talked for a long time, so thanks for bearing with me. Here's some resources I recommend also as I wait for questions to come in. Places I like to get supplies, Premier. Also, some of these companies give you discounts if you're members of the like various farm organizations. So yay. I save a lot of money with some of those memberships. Also, the electric fencing companies actually put out some pretty decent publications. The Premier Fencing Electric Fence Catalog has like a really nice insert in the middle that's like all about basics of electric fencing and like safety. Gallagher is another company that makes kind of fancy and expensive electric fencing supplies. They have a booklet that's nice. I recommend reading Chris Newman. He's from Sylvan Aqua Farms. I think he's going to be the keynote this year at the Future Harvest Conference. He is awesome, but he wrote a series called How to Start Farming Without Ruining Your Life. Highly recommend. You cook pasture meats differently. I always tell my customers this pork chop cooking instructional. As far as books go, Rebecca Thistlethwaite wrote a great one about the business of raising ethical meat, and Temple Grandin's Guide to Working with Farm Animals is an awesome book. It shows you how to set up handling systems, all that fun stuff. If you are totally new to this, the stories guides, they have one for like every type of farm animal. They're super great basic books. And then there's tons of resources online. Universities Extension, they put out publications and research. There's been a lot of really great research done on pasture pigs. Some, I think NC State got a couple of like SIG grants from NRCS. There's like tons of organizations. I don't know if it was Kentucky. They did a research project and they analyzed all the different types of heritage hogs, like in terms of like their like meat to bone ratio and all that fun stuff. NC State does a lot of, and A&T, they've got a small farm program. So a lot of these universities do great research and put out articles. There's lots of great Facebook groups. I think your mileage will vary in terms of some of the like good advice you are, but some of the really well-known and reputable like hog farmers lurk in those groups and give really great advice. There's tons of YouTube videos. I learned how to castrate pigs and artificially inseminate pigs by watching YouTube videos. So, there's good stuff out there. Let's see, questions here. Oh, water system in the winter.
Before you jump into the questions, I just have one quick housekeeping thing, if you don't mind. Thank you so much. And thank you for an incredible presentation thus far. All right, folks, I know we're getting close to 5, so I want to make sure I put the link to our post-event survey in the chat box here. Before you leave, please take a minute to fill it out. It's very, very quick. It just helps us make sure that we're continually taking feedback and constructive criticism into account as we go through our programming, and if you have anything you want Sarah to know, but it's a great place to pass on like praise and things as well. So if there are future events that you'd like to see, it's a great place to let us know. It's the SurveyMonkey link that was just pasted there. All right, back to questions.
Yeah, watering in the winter. Yeah, I use those stock tank like de-icers. You like drop them in and they keep the troughs from freezing, and extension cords, and I basically, we do butcher most of the pigs before fall, so I don't have as many on the farm, so I'm able to manage them in like paddocks and sections that are closer to the barns. I actually do have some electric outlets out in the fields, and have some really long extension cords that are like all weather, that can run the range without like blowing fuses. Let's see, the book about loading is Temple Grandin's book. They've got like the handling systems. Let's see, how many times per year are you farrowing a sow? I'd say 1.5 to 2. It kind of depends on the sow. I have some who seem to do better at different times of year. So, and I'm also in the middle of transitioning just because of the way my business has grown. Before I would farrow, everybody farrowed in the spring, and then I breed them in the fall, and so I was only having like 1 litter per year per sow, and then maybe one would have 2. I'm transitioning to year-round breeding, year-round farrowing, just because I have that much demand for the product. And I used to only do custom pigs in the fall. Now I'm like switching to doing them year-round. So 1.5, like she's usually, if she's not having 2 litters a year, then she's probably bred at least. Like she's farrowed and then is bred back in the same year.
Oops, sorry. I think there was an earlier question, it was way back up, about what kind of line you're using to run your water into the fields.
Oh yeah, it's just like plastic piping, like irrigation line from like DripWorks. I'll send you a link you can share with folks afterwards from supplies, but yeah, I get the irrigation supplies from DripWorks. And then somebody asked how much it costs to raise a pig. That's a really good question, and a number every farmer should know. I'm just going to throw this little spreadsheet up here. I am not good at numbers, and yeah, DripWorks is the company. And when I first started raising pigs, I was like, oh, I'll just do like a few and it'll be okay. And basically plugged numbers into a spreadsheet and figured out how much I'm spending on feed per pig, how much time, and that I was gonna make like no money unless I raised a lot more pigs and figured out how to scale this business. I don't know what I was thinking. I was like, I'll just have a few and like, I don't know, maybe sell like 10 a year. And I was like, it's way too much work to make that little money, or I'm gonna lose money unless I change what I'm doing and like switch to bulk feed. So this spreadsheet here, I'd say it's pretty like rough around the edges, but it's helpful. I kind of put this together. So this is my wholesale. So like whole hog or half hog. I think I'm up to like, yeah, let's see. So I'll walk you through the spreadsheet. So average weight, yeah, that's my hanging weight. Let's see. No, actually, that's, yeah, hanging weight, average weight here. So I take them into market. My sides are usually around 95 pounds a side. So maybe it's 200, a little over. It kind of depends on the pig, but there's 220 for all purposes. $5.50 a pound. It takes about $235 in grain to feed a pig and get it to market weight. If you're looking at an average of paying somebody $15 an hour, labor hours, I kind of just average it out. Some days you spend a lot more time with the pigs. Some days you just like chuck food at them, make sure they have water, and you're good to go. And it takes less than 30 minutes. So average half an hour a day. Processing costs about $210. I have built the cost of maintaining my breeding stock into this equation here. So you can kind of see. So like pasture pork is not cheap to produce. You definitely make more money, and I make more money retailing it out or through the CSA. My CSA basically ends up kind of netting, like costing on average about $8 a pound for all the like mixed cuts. So it's a good value for the customers. And I definitely make more than I would doing like custom, where I'm really, honestly, realistically, probably only making like $1,000 a hog. I think this number here, let's change it and see what happens here in this spreadsheet. Let's see. There. Okay. Yeah. So my sides are more like $90 to $95 a pound. So there you can see that. But really, I sell my pork. The cheapest thing I sell is ground pork, and it's $7 a pound. My bacon is $12 a pound. Like, it's definitely a premium product, and you know, priced accordingly. And also being a sort of small scale farmer in an area where a lot of the inputs aren't readily accessible to us, like the cost of production is high. Like, we can't really get cheap grain. Let's see. Any other questions?
So I would say now, if folks want to go ahead and unmute, feel free to turn on your video and we can end with a little bit more of a conversation with questions. You don't have to type everything in. Or maybe you covered everything. Oh, you're muted, Sarah.
I said maybe. I talked a lot. Hopefully I have answered people's questions.
That was a ton of really fantastic information. Thank you so much. All right, folks, so I'm gonna stick the SurveyMonkey link in the chat box one more time. If you are able to fill that out, it would be very greatly appreciated. And I'll stick on for a few minutes in case there are any more questions or clarifying pieces of information about anything. For those of you in the Mid-Atlantic region, I did want to let you know about one future harvest opportunity, and that is our beginning farmer training program. Applications are open right now. You can find more information on the website. It's futureharvestcasa.org or futureharvest.org. I believe we're using both right now, but futureharvestcasa.org will get you to the right place. And you'll see on the top bar, the menu bar of the website, more information about the BFTP, which is the Beginning Farmer Program. Yeah. Oh, another question here. Do you keep your sows and boars together all the time in general?
No. I am pretty picky about the timing of my breeding, and when I have them. So like right now, my boar has a buddy. He lives with a super old sow who I think is like postmenopausal. So he has a pal. Some people keep their boars in with like a barrow, so just a castrated male pig, or alone. I have found that keeping them alone, if they have to spend a lot of time by themselves, that's when I started seeing some behavioral issues where they're like humping random objects in the field or like busting through the fences, you know, because like they are social. They want a buddy. So he has a buddy who he lives with, and he's not with the sows year round. I put him in when I want them to get pregnant, and otherwise he's with his little pal.
All right. Great. Well, I think it seems like this is a good time to wrap it up. Like I said, I'll stay on. Sarah, you're welcome to stay on too. I can keep the line running for a little bit if folks would like to chat with each other and meet each other. I know it's virtual and Zoom, but we're trying a new thing with our virtual field days where we encourage attendees to at least get to meet other people who are, you know, interested in the same sorts of farming enterprises. So feel free to introduce yourself and hang out and chat for a bit if you'd like. Otherwise, thank you, Sarah, so much. That was amazing.
Mm-hmm. Thanks, everyone.
All right, I'm gonna go ahead and stop the recording too, so that